I'm really excited to be here today to talk about what got us here. Certainly probably won't get us there, right? And we alluded to that, working at a larger enterprise, we have sometimes a bit of a different way of doing things. But first, I'll tell you a bit about myself. So you know my name, Justin Watts. I'm an engineering director at Loblaw Digital, and I specifically look after a team called Engineering Productivity. And what the cool part about that group is they are essentially made up of developers, DevOps, QA, and a lot of the teams that can be disenfranchised, especially in more monolithic stacks, the people at the end of the line where software gets handed to, the last people to touch it before it goes out. And so, we're really interested in understanding how do we make engineers more productive, how do we empower? And we've reduced that to a mission statement, which is reduce toil, increase happiness, and get shit done. And oftentimes, if you're doing something wrong, you are increasing toil, reducing happiness, and getting nothing done, right? Almost certainly. And it's interesting to say we're the largest food retailer, the largest retailer in Canada. So let's start off with what is Canada? There are 37 million of us, right? That's like a tenth of the amount of Americans. And we affectionately are known as America's hat. We think of you as Canada's underpants. We have precisely one basketball team, better than all of yours. 0 of us say a boot. Seriously, it's never been said. But everyone does say A. And kind of what I want to give a sense of is that it is a massive country with not a lot of people. It spans the mountains of the West Coast, all the way to the wonderful small prairies in the middle and the East Coast. But interestingly, 90% of Canadians live within 100 miles of a U.S. border, and 40% of Canadians live within 5 major cities: Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, and Edmonton. And so it's a very different landscape than the United States. So to work at a company like Loblaw, when you start to see these numbers, you start to understand how impressive and crazy they are. 85% of Canadians shop in one of our stores every week. 85%, right? That's an unbelievable amount of the market. There are 2,800 of those stores nationwide that are within 10 minutes of 80% of Canadians, right? And when you're talking about trying to move things around, there are 4 very serious seasons. In the last slide, you'll saw that negative 81 degrees Fahrenheit. I converted that for you. That's tough. It's really, really tough to deal with 4 seasons. You have those same seasons here, of course, right? But we're not just operating in a small market like a single state, right, where everything is close by. You're trying to deal with a single thing like one city. And so for us to have 7 million people engage with our platforms every single day, that's a significant part of the population. And so when we mess something up, we feel like we're messing that up for all of Canada. That's a lot of pressure. And so what we try and do is figure out how to solve problems in a way that's going to speak specifically to Canadians. And ideally, that comes from Loblaw Digital, where I actually work, right? And we represent how to bring great experiences online. And our mission statement overall is to create compelling omni-channel experiences to help Canadians live life well. Now, one cool story about why I think it's important that we carry this on in this generation is that Loblaw is a 100-year-old company. And in the late 1800s, the thing that made them special was that they actually brought the shopping aisle to North America. So if you ever watch an old-timey movie, back before shopping aisles, there was a dude behind a counter, and he would give you your stuff, and he could serve one customer at a time. And then we were like, what if you got your own shit? And life was good. However, many other people realized that that was awesome, and then we almost went out of business, and then, the rest is history. But in the time since Loblaw Digital has been born, we've had different challenges. Solving retail at scale was really tough. Solving digital for Canadian scale is even tougher in my mind. And so what have we shipped? What is it that we're known for? Probably no one in this room has ever used any of this. However, if you are from Canada, you'll be really excited to see this slide. But we don't just do food retail, actually. Our first thing we ever built in 2013 was a clothing retailer, Joe Fresh, which actually does have an American presence. And then we said, okay, well, we've kind of figured out how to do e-commerce. Let's go after our main market. Let's do food. Let's do grocery. And we brought online shop.loblaws.ca, where you could buy groceries online. We also run the largest pharmacy network in Canada, Shoppers Drug Mart. And they have this section that when you walk into the store, it's like super bright. It's the beauty section, and you have to like get through it to get to the other parts. And I see why it's bright, because you need to see yourself when you're putting on cosmetics. Makes sense. And making a website for them was a whole different set of challenges, very different than food. The SKUs are different. What people expect, the shopping experience is different. And after that, we moved into a really interesting market, which is actually digital pharmacy. In Canada, right, healthcare comes standard with birth. And so it's interesting. It's not a predatory market to actually be in trying to help Canadians, get the prescriptions that they need. It is a very, very helpful thing. Refill reminders, ensuring that you understand how your medications work. Some really cool features like caregiver, if you're taking care of an elderly person in your family, like your grandmother, being able to actually log into join your account and actually help manage their prescriptions. Some really interesting stuff, some new challenges. In 2017, we realized that a lot of competition's coming from companies like Walmart and Amazon, especially in the major metropolitan areas. Canadians expect things to be delivered. They want to be able to pick things up from places that are not necessarily the store, right? So we partner with Instacart. You might, if you're on Twitter, have seen in 2018 this no-name brand is like blowing up right now in the marketing space. Essentially, the brand is just take product packaging, a very blank yellow label, and just the word of what it is. And so they've been like painting taxi cabs that just say taxi cab, or like entire subway stations that just say subway station. And it's great branding. It's worked really well. And most recently, we got into selling marijuana. But specifically in line with our brand, it's actually non-recreational, it's medicinal only. You'll know that Canada just recently legalized recreational marijuana, but we see that from a perspective of, once again, helping Canadians live life well and from the medical angle. And so, this is kind of what those experiences would look like. They have 3 major breakpoints: that desktop, that tablet, that mobile view. There are some mobile apps that go along with it. And I was pretty proud of the fact that we built 9 awesome digital experiences in 7 years. However, we needed to build 150 more in the next 2, right? That's a very big difference in numbers for anyone keeping count at home. So what was holding us back, right? During this conference, you're going to hear a lot, I think, on the nitty-gritty, the technical details, and I'm going for breadth, not depth here, because I think while tech stack is extremely important, culture and shifting culture and actually trying to get things adopted is a whole different barrel of fish. Right? You go to the presentation, you see you just type Netlify dev, and like boom, you make $1 billion, right? And it's really, really hard when it's like bigger than one team, or it's a company more than 4 or 5 people, right? At Loblaw Digital, at this point, we have 300 developers, and there are 250,000 people that work for Loblaws across the country. So what did I think was holding us back? Well, I started to look at our team structure. Essentially, we had these agile silos, like very waterfall and agile mixed together. And for those of you familiar with books like The Phoenix Project, written by Gene Kim, you'll know that the hard parts of having a setup like this, where you have teams that are very role-based, is that it feels a bit like a factory, right? And you get weird handoff delays, and as you go down the line, the person holding it is holding a lot more context than what came before them, and the last person holding it kind of usually gets in all the trouble when things go wrong. And feedback can be really slow. For ops, sometimes in companies can never even get to design. They only get to QA, and QA needs to represent them to dev, and dev represents them to design, and design to product. And so it's not that there's anything traditionally wrong with this approach, and it can work well. If you're making pieces of hardware, and you can't, just get it wrong and release another one next week, right? You really need to ensure that these things are perfected and you hand them down in this right order. And so to visualize what that looks like, the concept that Gene Kim brought in Phoenix Project is this idea of lean manufacturing. Like, truly think of this in its worst case like a factory, right? We actually have these teams shipping things down the line. And what I really disliked about this approach was that the things downstream are involved too late. And one of the most important things, if you understand lean manufacturing, is knowing your bill of materials. And so if you let work into the factory, right, if let's say what's in that first box is just absolutely not ready, it may be very late until it's found out it's not ready, but then you're not really sure what to do with it. And so sometimes, you could be like, QA's like, this isn't passing. Let's give it to ops anyway. And it happens. People just want to get things out, and you're like, I don't really want to hold this box anymore. And that's okay. There's a lot of stresses at work, but it leads to poor decision making on prioritization. And you might not know, like, is this the right bill of materials? Did you intend to not have French copy on this product? Maybe. And so you make decisions in isolation, and it doesn't necessarily work out all the time. And one of the biggest gaps is that priority information is not necessarily passed downstream. The thing that's given to you, the artifact, doesn't necessarily have all the details of what came before it. And this gets really, really bad when you work at a big company, because what you usually do is you add more dev teams to make more products. And you add more dev teams to make more products. And you add more dev teams to make more products. And you add more dev teams to make more products. And what happens when you do this is usually you don't scale your shared services teams. QA and ops start to get really, really overloaded. And those boxes at the bottom are all the things not getting shipped to customers. Work starts to pile up in your factory, right? And this is tough to break out of, right? And you'll see this, every team has a backlog. But unfortunately, this is where work really started to slow down for us. We were able to get 9 experiences out in 7 years, and I wouldn't say there's anything wrong, right? Work was getting done, people were happy, and we were able to get through it. But there's just all these inefficiencies starting to really build up, right? And so we did what anyone would do. We started deleting the boxes where the things were piling up. Let's get rid of ops. Who needs them? Let's get rid of QA. Who needs them? Let's empower the developers to do it all. Hand-wavy magic. Everyone loved it. We lived happily ever after. End of talk. Just kidding. It was a total trash fire. Serious trash fire. So let's talk about failure, right? Let's talk about what happens when you try to quickly solve problems that don't warrant quick solutions. I won't go through all of these in the longer version of this talk. I tried to dive into a lot of them. But you can see behind me here things like slow time to market, right? Quality owned by the last person who touched it. When you start to try and get rid of what ops did for you, and what QA did for you, you have trouble with scalability, with stability. Time to recovery. Master all of a sudden gets a lot more broken. Things aren't really experiments, they're just version 1 is the feature now, right? And you're like, oh wow, these teams might have actually been doing something that was really, really helpful, right? And so essentially what you realize is that it's not a small tweak, right? What got us here won't get us there, right? There's probably not much we can do in that way of working to really make it get to 150 experiences, right? And then the real learning for us was that to get from here to there, we have to do this thing called crossing the chasm, right? And crossing the chasm, it's from Jeffrey Moore's book, and it's about how people adapt to change and adopt it. And I first learned about it from an awesome dude named Mike Bland, who worked at Google, and he was actually trying to understand how to get testability up inside of Google. And really at the end of the day, change has to be deliberate, and you've got to be patient. So let's have a look at what crossing the chasm looks like, this curve of adoption of technology. You've got your innovators and your early adopters. And essentially those are people like us trying to tinker with the system, like let's just delete ops and delete QA and see what happens. We're like super edgy and cool, right? And so we're like-minded people just trying to make the world a better place, right? We're instigators. They're catalysts for change. But like the unfiltered barrage of new ideas can be super upsetting and costly to an organization. And so we keep trying to make attempts to change, but they're not quite getting anywhere, right? They get stuck at this thing called the chasm, right? And the people on the other side of this chasm are the early majority. They're open to change, but they need tools and procedures, and they're also the fad filter, right? And JAMStack could have been a fad. It's not, but it could have been. But the good part is that when we started talking about these things, right, is that there's someone there pushing back. They're a sympathetic audience, right, but they're going to give you direct feedback, constructive feedback. They're going to care about polish. They're going to care about scale, right? They're there to protect. And it's a very good thing to have them, right? That's what stopped us from entirely burning down a 100-year-old company by deleting those two teams. And so if you can win over the early majority, though, you can get to the late majority, which is that stabilizing force in your market. They kind of more slowly consume information. They run a version of iOS, couple behind the latest and let all of us figure out all the bugs. And they really best serve the needs of the long-term health of an organization. They're happy to adopt things, once they're stable. And then you have the laggards, and it's kind of like the long tail of that problem, right? Like that eventual full adoption. And usually as you're getting to this, you're starting to cross another chasm, right? And so the thing is, you're like, all right, I see the chasm, but how does one cross it? You've told me the problem, surely there must be a better way. And there is. And this is a really, really interesting concept that Mike Bland brought up called the rainbow of death. Amazing name, amazing name. And the rainbow of death attempts to explain how one crosses the chasm. And it's got these interesting steps of what the team, these instigators should do, right? And it's intervene, then validate, inform, inspire, mentor, and empower. And the goal there, right, is to take this thing that is new, that is fresh, this idea you have, and go from having teams that are very dependent on you to adopt it, and making them very independent. You don't have to do it in this order. You can do these steps in parallel. But what I want to do is now take you through our journey of kind of what we did with these steps. So first, intervene, right? And the first team that does that is my group, Engineering Productivity. We really care about how things get done. But we realized was, the way we had those teams structured, maybe it's not ideal. And so we thought we should start thinking about shared components, right? When we built all these experiences, we had like 9 carts. We had like 9 ways of doing a checkout button. We had 9 home pages. We had 9 different ways of thinking about content. And there were customer differences. Yes, pharmacy is different than grocery. Grocery is different than clothing retail. But it doesn't necessarily mean there can't be some connection at the base, right? Do you really have to hard fork every time you build something? Probably not, right? And then we built this group called DX Studio, so like Digital Experience Studio, right? If we're going to get to 150 websites, we probably need to stop spinning up a dev team and treating each one like a product and start thinking about how you can have a team that can produce products quickly and effectively, not just quickly, but effectively. So we started out with these 3 groups. What did they come up with? Well, this is what we had, right? And we knew it wasn't really going to work for us. And the first smart idea was, okay, let's not delete things, okay? Ideally, everyone should be independent. Founding principle, right? We want to be able to have work go out without bottlenecking it to some central group. But, if we do that, we're just kind of back to where we were, where we had 1 dev team, right? And we know that that's not necessarily going to scale. We don't want to go build out 150 dev teams. And so we're like, all right, let's go vertical. Essentially what we mean by this, right, is how is it that we have each of these groups deliver value without being dependent necessarily on the other? But this slide doesn't make much sense, right? You're like, well, I'm not really sure how each of these teams is going to do something individually. And that's because we still had the wrong alignment, right? These teams were aligned to a role instead of a unit of shippable work. And so the really big win came when we thought, well, what is it that these websites need to do, these digital experiences need to do? What are the units of shippable value? And essentially it boiled down to content, components, and features. And so this is where we really started to adopt the JAMStack, right? We brought in Contentful for our content. It's in the name. Without Contentful, right, we are using a CMS made by SAP called Hybris. It is essentially WordPress, way worse, for enterprises for a lot more money. I feel like I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, because we're still a very big partner of theirs, and this is being recorded. I'm so sorry. But without it, right, like it was a really big pain to deal with content. We kind of had it shipped out of the box with one way of listing that content, one way of showing it. It was very hard to break free, and so when people did, they really went outside of the box and no longer were getting the value that Hybris actually provided out of the box. And so with Contentful, right, we're empowering the people who cared about content to get that to production. And that might be a mix of developers, product folks, operation, QA. I'm not saying these teams necessarily are just pure devs. They could be, they might not be, but the key is that the people that are on them care about that unit of shippable work. And they align themselves to get that unit of shippable work out. And so the next group is components, right? And the idea here was, well, we have a whole lot of checkout buttons, we got a whole lot of home pages, a whole lot of hero banners, a whole lot of like design and style components. And so we thought we should really start thinking about design libraries, right? We should really start thinking about shared component libraries, start thinking about how, if we wanted to change our brand after we built 150 sites, are we really gonna have to go make 150 changes, or can we make one in the source of truth and have that propagate? And so it's not all around React Storybook, but I needed a logo to go there. React Storybook, Storybook is a really cool tool. It definitely helped us with it. It was hard to do that change across many properties without it. It was really actually mostly the hardest thing for us was getting an understanding of what is in your shared component library, what is your design language. And so being able to have a place to express that was really valuable for this team. So when you were onboarded, there's actually somewhere to go to get this information. And the last key thing, right, was like trying to get rid of this big monolithic stack that we had. And for us, we picked Next.js. Now, it's JAMStack Conf, so I have to tell you that I love JAMStack. However, Next.js does let you do some interesting things outside of the JAMStack. And for us coming from a big enterprise, we're used to working as a monolith. We started moving to service architecture. Things like isomorphic rendering, server-side rendering, dealing with private services that don't have public-facing endpoints. There's a fair bit to handle, and Next.js did allow us to kind of more easily blend in with where we were, even if it wasn't necessarily representative of where we wanted to end up. So we do a lot of JAMStack, but we account for a few other quirks. And so, without Next.js, we were pushing to servers. We were running our own edge network. We were doing everything you could imagine to run a business. And we were thinking and getting stuck so much in the end-to-end testing, the operation deployment, that a lot of work wasn't getting done. It wasn't about the devs. It was really about the ops, right? Like that's what slowed things down. And so being able to compile a static bundle and release that to a CDN, right, absolutely changed our life. And so the thing that bound this all together was Netlify, brought to you by Netlify. And we were super excited, right? Without this, like I said, we were running a huge amount of the right side of the stack and spending most of our time getting stuck there, getting frustrated there. So, with Netlify, it really helped empower those development teams to actually get their code to production. So, now that we have a stack, what's next? Well, we've got to validate it, right? That's the next step in the rainbow of death. So we built a digital experience for the biggest business and the most profitable brand on a national holiday. We built Shop Like a Mother. It was a really awesome Mother's Day campaign. I'm really proud of it. And the results were really astounding. This is the old stack, and that's the new stack, right? It was bonkers, and I'm really, really proud of this. Usually when you see the demo, they do a hello world page. You're like, yeah, that's easy to make performant. But we were blown away by this. By the numbers, we're talking about a 17.5x faster Contentful paint, right? 8x on meaningful paint, 9x on timed interactive, 92% better performance, 26% better accessibility, and we upped our SEO somehow by 11%. And I don't remember putting any effort into it, but apparently we did. And so, it's bonkers. It's really, really bonkers. And we did that all with no servers, right? And our lead time was way, way down. We built this thing in a month, and we'd taken a year previously to get something to production. We were running accidentally on the free plan of Netlify. So the first month was $38,000 cheaper. It was great. We eventually didn't run on the free plan, and I highly suggest you don't if you care about your website. But we didn't crash, and response time remained pretty consistent. But things like dynamic environments, the fact that we didn't have to rely on an ops team to go and provision you an environment, people could just throw up more Netlify deployments with really, really cool noun-based domains, right? And I was going to write 0 attack vectors, but I was really afraid that I was going to anger a hacker, and then my site would crash during my talk. So I've just said fewer. And an infinitely happier team, right? So our approach is validated. Yay! So what's next? Inform, yell about it on Twitter, and that's a really important step. You got to talk about it, talk about your wins. You got to let people know. And so we did. We went to the company, went to every team. We went to the Android team. We're like, oh, sorry, not you. Went back to the web team. No, you should really do this, right? And the intent there, right, is to get to inspiration. And how best to inspire than to lead, right? So what we did was we just built out 11 more experiences in 4 months, and we proved that it could be done. Right? We didn't ask you to trust us. We didn't say if you do this, life will be. We said we're going to do it. We're going to show you it's great, and that is the best way to inspire anybody. Right? We set the bar on performance, time to market, accessibility, operational expense. Right? We just proved it could be done. And then the next step is to mentor. Right? And mentorship for us looked a lot like best practices, lessons learned, talking at meetups, talking at conferences, including this one. And essentially what we want to do is remove fear, doubt, and unknown. So we've proven that we can do it. We now want to say, well, it isn't just all hand-waving magic or secretly we employed an army of minions to do this and made it all up. It's that it's real, and here's where we failed. Here's where we succeeded. You need to share that information. It's really, really important to share that. And once you do that, right, it's about empowerment. And this is a step that I think is really tough, and something that they're talking about in the talk previously. This empowering of how do you actually help people do it themselves to be fully independent. Netlify Dev is a great example of that, right? And for us in our company, it was starter kits and golden paths. Right? We're like, well, could we just turn this into Heroku for Loblaw Digital? We don't need to Heroku or Cloud Run solve for how everyone does things. We just need to solve for our way of doing things. And it's not that we wanted 150 identical websites, but they're going to be pretty similar, right? So if you can build a starter kit that gives you Next.js, it gives you the deployment pipeline, it gives you how to get content into Contentful, builds a space for you, that's a really great way to help a team get started, right? And do it themselves. They can fork it and go from there. And if you give them a golden path of how to get to production, that whole narrative, that story, they're going to feel probably pretty strong that they can do it themselves. So this is the rainbow of death. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty useful to help get across the chasm. So we fell in love with JAMStack and lived happily ever after. Just kidding. It was still a trash fire. This slide was going to be dependent on how much time I had left, on how much I got into digging at all the companies that build this awesome stuff. I only have 2 minutes, so I'll keep it short. In essence, right, there's still problems. It doesn't solve everything. Teams now are asking, can I put my API docs here? What about internal sites? Everything seemingly is super easy, so change management is getting pretty loose. Someone has accidentally deleted the production version of a website because it was right beside the non-production one in the Netlify UI, and there was no warning. Right? People are like, I want to talk to DevOps. Get them on the phone. And I'm just like, yo, Netlify, you got to pick up the phone. And also we had no experiments, and now everything's an experiment. Leave it all in production. Never delete anything. Let's let it all build up in Contentful and Netlify, right? And someone did ask me, how do we load test Netlify? And I'm like, very expensively. You can throw all you want at it. We're just going to pay for it. And then someone did put Akamai back on top of Netlify, which I found hilarious. Good job, ops, dude. So yeah, there's still things that need to be fixed, right? And if I ever come back and talk about this again, hopefully we'll have gotten through some more of these. But essentially, right, we continually traverse the rainbow of death so that we can successfully cross the chasm between what got us here and what will get us there. Overall, it's just really important to remember, right, if you fix the process of how to shift culture, how to engage your teams, how to listen to them, get feedback and help, right, we're going to see what comes after the JAMStack, right? There was things that came before it as well. And so fixing that part of solving problems makes adopting things like the JAMStack a lot easier, but prepares you for whatever future is ahead of us. So, thank you very much.